Elisabeth Fritzl spent 24 years in captivity, confined to a makeshift cellar and tortured at the hands of her own father, Joseph Fritzl. On August 28, 1984, 18-year-old Elisabeth went missing. Her mother Rosemary filed a missing persons report, frantic about where her daughter could be. For weeks there was no word, and her parents were left to assume the worst of the worst. But there was something far more heinous happening right below them. Out of nowhere, a letter arrived from Elisabeth, claiming that she had grown tired of her own family and had decided to run away. Her father, Joseph, had told the police officers that came to the house that he had absolutely no idea where she could possibly have gone, but that she had likely joined a religious cult, something that she had apparently talked about doing previously. But the truth was that Joseph Fritzl knew exactly where his daughter was. She was about 20 feet below where the police officer was standing. After she had turned 18 and after training as a waitress, she had lined up a possible job in the Austrian town of Linz. Instead, that day Joseph had called his daughter into the cellar of the home. He was refitting a door to the newly renovated cellar and needed some help carrying it. As she held the door, Joseph fixed it into place. As soon as it was on its hinges, he swung it open, forcing Elisabeth inside and knocked her unconscious with an ether-soaked towel and tied her to a bed with a metal chain. He'd received permission to expand his cellar in the late 1970s. It was here he meticulously had built the prison, which included several windowless rooms stuffed into 650 square feet. For the next 24 years, inside the dirt-walled cellar would be the only thing that Elisabeth would see. Her father would lie to her mother and the police, feeding them stories that were not true about how she had run away. Eventually, the police investigation into her whereabouts would run cold, and the world would forget the missing Fritzl girl. As far as the rest of the family were concerned, Joseph would head down to the cellar every morning at 9 a.m. to draw plans for the machines that he sold. On occasion he would spend the night, and Rosemary wouldn't worry because her husband was a hard-working man and was thoroughly dedicated to his career. For Elisabeth, her father became a monster. At the minimum he would visit her in the cellar 3 times a week. Usually it was every day. For the first 2 years he left her alone and kept her as his captive. Then he began to rape her, continuing the nightly visits he had begun when she was just 11 years old. He'd beat her and punished her further by cutting off the electricity. 2 years into her captivity, she became pregnant, though she miscarried 10 weeks into the pregnancy. 2 years later, she fell pregnant again, and this time she carried to term. In August 1988, a baby girl named Kerstin was born. She had given birth on her own with the help of a pregnancy book that her father had begrudgingly provided. He also gave her scissors, a blanket, and diapers. He didn't check on either one of them until 20 days after she was born. 2 years later, a boy named Stefan was born, followed by a third child, Lisa, in August of 1992. Though her first 2 kids stayed in the cellar, Joseph took Lisa out of the cellar because of the lack of space. Kerstin and Stefan remained in the cellar with their mother for the duration of her imprisonment, being brought weekly rations of food and water by Joseph. Elisabeth attempted to teach them with the rudimentary education she had and tried to give them the most normal life she could given the situation. Over the next 24 years, Elisabeth would give birth to 5 more children. 1 more was allowed to stay in the cellar with her, 1 died shortly after birth, and the other 3 were taken upstairs to live with Rosemary and Joseph. However, he couldn't just bring them upstairs, he had to hide what he had truly done from Rosemary. He staged elaborate findings of the children, often placing them on bushes near the home or right on the doorstep. Each time, the child would be swaddled neatly and accompanied with a note allegedly written by Elisabeth, saying that she couldn't take care of the baby and was leaving it with her parents for safekeeping. With Lisa, he had put her in a cardboard box and a letter he'd forced Elisabeth to write, saying, "Dear parent, I am leaving you with my little daughter Lisa. Take good care of my little girl. I breastfed her for about 6.5 months, and now she drinks her milk from the bottle. She is a good girl and eats everything else from the spoon." How social services never questioned the appearance of the children and just allowed the Fritzls to keep them as their own is truly shocking. But of course, with the alleged note they carried, officials were under the impression that they were their grandchildren and that the letter had convinced them. 9-month-old Monica showed up at the house in December of 1994, and a boy named Alexander appeared in 1997. But what no one knew was that Alexander had been born a twin. His brother, Michael, had died a few days after birth. As Michael struggled to breathe, Joseph allegedly told Elisabeth, "What will be, will be." He later burned the infant's body in an incinerator and scattered his ashes in the family garden. In 2002, Felix was born, and he was left in the cellar. Joseph would later tell authorities that his wife couldn't have cared for another child. Even though Joseph kept Elisabeth captive for over 2 decades, it is not actually known how long he wanted to keep her in that cellar. He had gotten away with keeping her there for about 24 years. For all we know, he would have kept going and never let her out. But then, in 2008, one of the children in the cellar became ill. Elisabeth begged her father to allow a 19-year-old daughter, Kirsten, to go to the hospital. She'd fallen extremely ill and critically ill. Joseph agreed eventually to take her to the hospital. He removed Kirsten from the cellar and called an ambulance, claiming that he had a note from Kirsten's mother which explained her condition. For a week, police questioned Kirsten and asked the public for any information on her family. No one came forward because there was no family to speak of. The police eventually grew suspicious of Joseph and reopened the investigation into the disappearance of his daughter, Elisabeth Fritzl. They began to read the letters that were supposedly written by her to her parents. However, there were inconsistencies in them. Was it the pressure or he changed his mind? We really don't know. But on April 26, 2008, he released Elisabeth from the cell for the first time in 24 years. She immediately went to the hospital to see her daughter, where the hospital staff had then alerted the police due to her suspicious arrival. That night, she was taken into custody to be questioned about her daughter's illness and her father's story. After making the police promise she never had to see her father again, Elisabeth then told them everything that happened in the last 24 years. She explained that her father kept her in a basement and that she had 7 children. She explained that Joseph was the father of all 7 of them and that he would come down during the night, make her watch pornographic films and then rape her. She explained that he had been abusing her ever since she was 11 years old. That night, Joseph Fritzl was arrested. After the arrest, the children in the cellar were released and Rosemary fled the home. She had allegedly known nothing and Joseph backed up this account. The tenants who had lived in the apartment on the first floor of the Fritzl home also never knew what was happening right beneath them, as Joseph explained away all the sounds by blaming faulty piping and a noisy heater. Today, Elisabeth Fritzl lives under a new identity in a secret Austrian village known only as Village X. The home is under constant CCTV and police patrol every corner. The family doesn't allow any interviews anywhere within their walls and decline to give any themselves. She is now in her late 50s, but the last photo taken of her was when she was just 16 years old. Now, Joseph has a history of criminal behaviour. In 1967, he broke into the Linz home of a 24-year-old nurse while her husband was away and raped her while holding a knife to her throat, threatening to kill her if she screamed. According to an annual report for 1967 and a press release for the same year, he was also named as a suspect in a case of attempted rape of a 21-year-old woman and was known for indecent exposure. He was arrested and served 12 months of an 18-month prison sentence. In accordance with Austrian law, his criminal record was expunged after 15 years. As a result, more than 25 years later, when he applied to adopt and/or foster Elisabeth's children, the local social services authority did not discover his criminal history because it's gone. After his arrest, he claimed that his disgusting behavior towards his own daughter was not rape, but was consensual. In a news publication, he said that he always knew during the whole 24 years that what I was doing was not right, that I must have been crazy to do such a thing, yet it became a normal occurrence to lead a second life in the basement of my house. He had decided that he needed to imprison Elisabeth because she didn't listen or follow the rules when she became a teenager. Quote, "That is why I had to do something. I had to create a place where I could keep her, by force if necessary, away from the outside world." He started to reflect on his childhood and the relationship he had had with his mother. He had initially said she was the best woman in the world. Later, he expressed a much more negative opinion of her and claimed that she used to beat me, hit me until I was lying in a pool of blood on the floor. It left me feeling totally humiliated and weak. My mother was a servant and she used to work hard all her life. I never had a kiss from her. I was never cuddled, although I wanted it. I wanted her to be good to me. But once he married in 1959, the roles reversed. He bought the house and his mother moved in with them. His mother had started to fear him. Eventually, he admitted he had later locked his mother in the attic and bricked up her window after telling neighbours that she had died, and kept her locked up until her death in 1980. It is unknown how Fritzl kept his mother locked up in the attic, but newspapers have speculated that it may have been up to 20 years. In a report by forensic psychiatrist Aldehard Kastner, he diagnosed Fritzl as having a severe combined personality disorder, which included borderline, schizotypical, and schizoid types, and a sexual disorder, and recommended that he receive psychiatric care for the rest of his life. Later reports revealed that he had premeditated the imprisonment of his daughter, but not for disciplining her, but for his own gratification. On March 18, 2009, Elisabeth attended the second day of the criminal trial. Joseph's attorney had confirmed that Elisabeth had been in the visitors' gallery in disguise at the time her video testimony was aired. Joseph recognized her in court and went pale and broke down. The next day, he began the proceedings by approaching the judge and changing his pleas to guilty on all charges. On March 19, 2009, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 15 years. He said he accepted the sentence and would not appeal. He is currently serving out his sentence in Garsten Abbey, a former monastery in Upper Austria that has been converted into a prison. On the basis of new psychiatric assessments, he may be released from the psychiatric detention facility and moved to a regular prison to serve the rest of his sentence. If approved in Vienna, this would make him eligible for early release this year, as under Austrian law, he has already served 15 years of his sentence. Well, that's it for today's case. Make sure to subscribe and like the video, and do let me know down in the comments below what you thought of this case, and I'll definitely see you for the next one.